Well, the recent referendum here in Britain, where we voted to leave the European Union, produced a howl of anguish from quite a lot of young people who didn't understand that everyone in Britain has a vote, even old people and plebs, and that every vote counts equally. When they realised that, they were horrified. Of course, equality is just so unfair. So they did what anyone would do who's never been told that they can't have their way. They took to the streets with abusive slogans and coarsely worded banners demanding that old people should just die for destroying their future. And they demanded another referendum. And here's the best bit. They actually expected to be taken seriously. No, I'm not joking. They really did. I know, it's just unbelievably shallow and selfish, but that's what they did, because that's who they are. And 2 weeks later, they are still complaining. That's right, Generation Snowflake is whining again. In fact, more older people voted to remain in the EU than all the 18 to 24-year-olds who could be bothered to tear themselves away from the PlayStation for 5 minutes to actually vote at all. And also, plenty of young people voted to leave because, despite the best efforts of our education system, they somehow developed minds of their own. And they took the trouble to examine the EU, what it is and how it actually works, and then they sensibly voted to leave while they still could. As for the supposedly broken promise that £350 million a week that goes to the EU would now be spent on the National Health Service, the whole point is that the elected government of this country now has control over how that money is spent, whereas before it didn't, and none of it went to the NHS, but now it can. Quite a lot of it went on EU propaganda in schools and universities, which is why so many young people just blindly assume that the EU is a great idea. Maybe they should ask the young people of Southern Europe how it's working out for them. In Greece, youth unemployment is now 50%. In Spain, 45%. Italy, 40%. What about their future? Well, last year, the Greeks tried to do something about their future when they elected a new government committed to ending austerity, but they were told by the EU that they couldn't have that. So they held a referendum where they voted to insist on it, and again, they were told that they couldn't have it. And so they voted yet again, this time for EU-approved policies that will condemn a generation of Greeks to poverty and will allow their country to be asset stripped by foreign corporations. The Greek people now know that there is no longer any point in voting in elections because whatever they vote for, they're not going to get it unless it's what they've been told to vote for. There is no choice. There is no democracy. This is the European Union, and this is why Britain voted to leave. But nobody here is pulling up a drawbridge, and that was never on the cards. Nor do we have any problem with foreigners. Again, sorry to disappoint. We're simply asserting our right to make our own laws in our own country, and not to have laws that we don't want imposed on us from outside by people we haven't elected and can't remove. That's where it begins and ends. We did not vote to stop immigration, but to control immigration based on what the country needs, which is qualified people in sustainable numbers who want to contribute to our society, and it doesn't matter where they come from or what colour they are. But you try telling that to the progressive media. They literally do not want to know. Watch the appalling Christiane Amanpour's train wreck interview with the Conservative politician Daniel Hannan on CNN, where she's so determined to make it all about race and hate that she makes an undignified fool of herself and damages the credibility of her network. Not that it was great to begin with, in fairness, but hers was just one glaring example of the kind of treatment we got from the progressive media, who were absolutely disgusted with the British people. When the result first came through, there were so many long faces at the supposedly impartial BBC, I thought I was watching a horse race. And all over the Western world, media round tables of know-nothing know-it-alls and educated idiots breezily dismissed the result and the people who voted for it as xenophobic and racist, with no attempt to address our arguments, but just as an assumption, just an automatic assumption, because that's how they always talk about people like us, and usually they get away with it because usually we're not listening. But we are listening now, because one thing that this referendum has made very clear to a lot of ordinary, decent people in Britain is just how patronised and how despised they are by an arrogant, progressive minority that behaves like a majority as if by some kind of divine right. Well, like us or not, folks, we, the plebs, we are the people who saved democracy in Britain, and we have everything to be proud of. We are the people who kept this country free when others were prepared to sell it out for their own personal convenience. The world's media should be celebrating us, not dismissing us and damning us as if we're some kind of brutal subhuman species with no subtlety in humanity and a uniformly low IQ. We reasserted the fundamental principle that desperately needed to be reasserted, that political power derives from the people, and that politicians, however grandly they style themselves, are in fact our servants, not our rulers. And we defeated a cynical establishment campaign of lies and threats that had no arguments beyond transient economics, but we could see that this was far more important than that, and that fundamentals were at stake that needed to be addressed, and that this was probably our last chance to do it. So we took that chance and we saved our democracy. And indeed, just a few days after the vote took place, the European Union announced plans to eliminate all national borders in Europe and to create one single superstate with its own army, just as we had predicted. We saved our democracy from people like this, from the Euro-federalists, from the political establishment, from the globalist media, big banks and big business, all of whom conspired to try to neutralise our voice. And we saved it too from all you crybabies who took to the streets to make this referendum all about you, with no attempt at all to understand why so many people voted to leave, but instead dismissing us as ignorant racists and plebs. Far from destroying your precious future, you'll thank us one day when your future arrives and you finally grow up and begin to understand what you were almost conned into giving away, not just for yourselves, but for all future generations. We saved our democracy from your immaturity, shallowness, selfishness, and downright ignorance, and we made you aware for the very first time that this world does not revolve around you. And given your hysterical, petulant reaction, if this is the harshest lesson that you pathetic inadequates ever have to learn in your miserable lives, you will be very lucky indeed. Peace.